Thanks, Michael. Firstly, you can see that the Treasurer and Wayne have done this before because they were very clever and bought PowerPoints so that you didn't have to look at them the entire time on the screen, so I apologise. I'm a little bit croaky, so you may have to look at me sniffling through my talk. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at today's summit. I'll say up front, if you're expecting me to discuss the current action AUSTRAC has against the Commonwealth Bank, you will be sorely disappointed. Of course, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to talk about that before, whilst it's before the courts, but I will talk about the work that we are doing with all four banks in the meantime. A little bit of a change in pace because, as Michael said, I don't have a regulatory background. It's interesting to listen to Wayne and then the Treasurer, and you'll see from what I want to talk to you about, it is mainly focused on crime and the way the government has structured us as a regulator is quite different. Wayne comes under the Treasurer's portfolio as a regulator, and that's very evident and very proper for the prudential control that he has. The government very intentionally chose another law enforcement professional to run AUSTRAC, and just recently AUSTRAC's been brought under the Home Affairs portfolio, where we're joined with all of the other law enforcement Commonwealth bodies in that portfolio. We've also been included in the intelligence agencies. There were 6 intelligence agencies that set up the Australian intelligence community. There was a recent review that made that expand this year into 10 intelligence communities. So the foreign intelligence communities are now part of a larger group with us. That's AUSTRAC, the AFP, Border Force and the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission. So I think that sets the scene for what AUSTRAC does and what our focus is. We're a financial intelligence agency that is the envy of many around the world because we have the dual role of regulator and financial intelligence unit, but I'll come to that. So I intend to talk today about AUSTRAC working with the financial sector not only to build trust, but to build a true partnership, despite some media reporting to the contrary. For those of you that may not be aware, as I just said, AUSTRAC is a regulator and Australia's financial intelligence unit, a unique agency in that we have the 2 roles. Much like a feedback loop, our intelligence and regulatory functions harness different information and analysis when combined provide truly unique insights into a range of risk factors in the financial sector. And as we all know, there are many risk factors and threats that we face domestically and within the global economy. In particular, the financial sector, as you know, is at risk from abuse and exploitation from a range of criminal actors. The global financial sector faces unprecedented disruption, principally driven by technological advancements, which are being actively exploited to generate, conceal and transfer illicit money around the world. Australia is not immune to this. AUSTRAC has observed terrorist and criminal groups deliberately target and misuse the financial sector for nefarious purposes. Terrorist groups have been observed exploiting financial services by commingling legitimate and illegitimate funds to disguise their origin and conceal the financing of terrorist activities. Serious financial crime is rapidly evolving, with serious and organised crime groups harnessing technology, professional facilitators and offshore service providers to navigate financial frameworks and technology systems to exploit vulnerabilities. Cybercrime, of course, and we've heard that mentioned a number of times this morning, and I'm sure you will across the next couple of days, remains a pervasive threat to Australia's national and economic prosperity, with cybercrime expertise improving and tradecraft being adapted to target specific businesses. Cyber capabilities are increasingly being deployed to steal the details of consumers and commercially sensitive information, as well as target and exploit payment systems across the financial sector. Innovation and the expansion of digitisation has produced a range of new and evolving payment methods and platforms, including peer-to-peer systems, easily transportable and tradable stored value cards, and of course, digital and cryptocurrencies. It's estimated that there will be 30 to 50 billion devices connected to the internet in 2020, which will translate into an even greater reach for e-commerce. However, these very same technologies are used by criminals to commit crime and launder illicit wealth. And in all these circumstances, the first and sometimes the last line of defence is the financial sector. So this is why Australia's AML CTF, and I will keep saying AML CTF because it's a very long explanation otherwise, and it's going to be quite narrow, but one of the things I really want to focus on is the difference of what we do compared to some of the other regulations. We have a very narrow remit, AML CTF, and we also look at serious and organised crime. So this is why the regime has been established on a foundation of trust. For example, the former Attorney General, Philip Ruddock, on introducing the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Act 2006, noted, the risk-based regulatory approach recognises that reporting entities have the experience and knowledge needed to assess and mitigate risk. And we can also draw on the more recent judgment by the Federal Court against Tabcorp. Justice Perham quoted in his findings, "It will be seen that this regulatory decision by the Parliament put at the heart of the scheme of regulation the concept of AML CTF programs, which would be monitored by the regulator AUSTRAC. In a sense, it involved the reposing in industry of a degree of trust for its operation of the AML CTF risk management system." Justice Perham further noted, "The Act deals severely with breaches of that trust." Collectively, our AML CTF regime puts trust in regulated entities to identify and mitigate risk because they are best placed to do this. Just like the recent events, and we've heard it mentioned a couple of times this morning, involving the Australia cricket team, or for the rugby fans here, the Manly salary cap breaches of trust are expected to be punished in accordance with the community's expectations. But I'd argue that the modern paradigm is that the AML CTF regime must be more than trust. It must be a partnership, a unique alliance between government and industry. This position is effectively underpinned by the recognition that the world is undergoing such rapid change that no one agency, organisation, or indeed nation can maintain pace with and defend itself against the real and pervasive threats of terrorism and organised crime. The responsibility therefore rests on government and industry to work together for the benefit of the entire community, hardening the sector against financial crime and terrorism. For many years, rhetoric has focused on the need for such partnerships, but the hurdles have continuously proved to be too hard to overcome. Instead, relationships between the private and public sector have historically been quite transactional. So how do we shift the paradigm of partnership? First and foremost is the willingness by both industry and government to commit to an open and honest relationship, which we've heard talked about a couple of times this morning already. Yes, there are risks that could expose parties to litigation, and risks that sensitive and perhaps confidential information will be made public. But what of the risks if we don't partner? What of the situation where we don't collaborate and your family or my family comes to harm? Second is an appreciation of the different roles and responsibilities of industry and government. For example, the National Commission of Audit noted that governments shape the way societies and economies function and meet the needs of our national interests, but they are supplement, not a substitute to markets. And we must also recognise that diversity breeds ingenuity and that our different roles can bring innovative solutions to the table. Lastly, we must also consider the benefit of bringing together our collective capabilities. Now, AUSTRAC is a very small organisation. We've only got around 300 people. So we cannot bring criminal actors to justice alone. Together with law enforcement, and partnering with the entire financial sector, we can become a coalition of more than 500,000 people with a shared vision to protect our community. This is why AUSTRAC's been moving beyond the thinking of trust in industry to one of partnership with industry to manage the MLTF risk across the financial system. I recently spoke at the ASEAN Counter-Terrorism Conference here in Sydney about public-private partnerships and some of the successes we had working with industry. I spoke on behalf of the AUSTRAC experience, and Alexandra Holcomb from Westpac spoke on behalf of industry's experience. In particular, I highlighted the role the private sector must play in financial crime and countering terrorism financing, which was the impetus for the establishment of AUSTRAC's initiative called the Fintel Alliance. The Fintel Alliance is a public-private partnership working collaboratively to develop shared financial intelligence and develop innovative solutions to contribute to the growth of the Australian economy and protect the Australian financial system. It was only established 12 months ago, and it's a centre of excellence for financial intelligence. We use new methods, new technologies, and new partners to combat the rapidly changing environments of money laundering and terrorism financing. And this is being achieved in a way that we haven't done previously. Intensive side-by-side collaboration, and that's physical as well as electronically, with government agencies, law enforcement, and most importantly, industry. The Alliance currently comprises of 16 representatives across the banking, remittance and payment sectors, as well as law enforcement, policy and regulatory partners. Importantly, and despite some media reports suggesting otherwise, our collaboration with financial institutions within the Alliance continues regardless of any action by AUSTRAC's regulatory arm. This reflects the absolute importance of our mission, protecting the community, which is a view shared by all Alliance members. To demonstrate this, AUSTRAC, with its Alliance partners, including ANZ, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, National Australia Bank, Westpac, Macquarie Bank, HSBC, Western Union and PayPal, have been working to disrupt the ability of criminal networks to recruit money mules and harden the financial sector from exploitation. Data provided by law enforcement identifying suspected money mules was shared amongst industry partners and matched across data holdings. Analysis of the information identified considerable differences in the money laundering methodologies of Eastern European money mules. As a result of this analysis, we developed a contemporary, comprehensive profile of the demographic, financial and travel indicators of money mules. As an outcome, industry have used these reports to better detect and report activities suspected to be money mules and which have driven further avenues of inquiry. Separately, the Fintel Alliance has also initiated a project focused on child sex exploitation. And these are some of the things that people are quite surprised. They say, what does money laundering and terrorism financing have to do with child sex exploitation? Well, it is connected to serious and organised crime, and it's another area that we're assisting law enforcement in using financial intelligence, and of course there is money laundering involved. This is an issue that obviously impacts greatly on Australia, but impacts greatly on our Southeast Asian neighbours. This particular initiative was driven by Western Union, which recognised the importance of bringing information sources together to disrupt this hideous crime. The project used information about suspected or known offenders both in Australia and internationally, previously unavailable to Fintel Alliance members. For example, law enforcement agencies have shared with industry partners inside knowledge and classified information on suspected overseas facilitators. The International Justice Mission in the Philippines has provided a list of known or arrested facilitators, which were then matched against AUSTRAC data and shared among the Fintel Alliance partners. The ANZ Bank and Western Union have provided details of internal monitoring to assist in the development of a financial indicators paper, which was shared with all partners. And the results of the project have been really encouraging. There's been an increase in intelligence generated on previously unknown offenders, in excess of 20 referrals of actionable high-quality targets to law enforcement, as well as the disclosure of suspected facilitators to international counterparts in high-risk areas in the Southeast Asian region. Additionally, the project resulted in a 316% increase in suspicious transaction reports over the past 12 months relating to the purchase of child exploitation material, which AUSTRAC has shared with its law enforcement partners. The International Centre for Missing and Exploited Children has recognised the benefits of the project and has invited the Fintel Alliance to play a leading role in educating and informing corporations such as Facebook, MasterCard and Google as part of the Financial Coalition Against Child Pornography. These results really demonstrate government and industry are delivering collectively for the community. And importantly, it's not the end state for the Fintel Alliance. These were fairly low-risk projects that we started off in the first 12 months, and they've gone so well, we're now embarking on a range of other projects, and we're looking at expanding private partners to look at terrorism financing, tax evasion, cybercrime, and of course supporting law enforcement to disrupt serious organised crime. So our other arm, regulation. We've also been collaborating with industry on improving our regulatory capacity. Over the last 18 months, we've been working together to co-design the elements of our regulatory framework. As a regulator, we operate on the assumption that industry wants to do the right thing, and they take seriously the trust that the Parliament has placed in them. We support industry to fulfil its obligations, but we also are prepared to act when industry betrays that trust. AUSTRAC wants to move on, though, beyond traditional compliance approaches to instead work together to improve the ability of the sector to deliver best practice management of their MLTF risks. So what does it look like in practice? We're co-designing regulatory tools, such as redesigning AUSTRAC's annual compliance self-assessment to improve industry's understanding of their obligations. We've increased feedback about industry reporting, which has led to better financial intelligence. We've established an effective community of practice that shares risk and best practice, and we've published guidelines and information materials in collaboration with industry. Another example of our risk assessment program, where the primary aim of the program is to provide industry with detailed and sector-specific information to help them harden their businesses against criminal misuse. In the past 2 years, we've published assessments on superannuation, financial planning, securities, derivatives and stored value cards, which industry have used to tighten their controls, train their staff, revise their AML/CTF programs and risk assessments, and to report to senior management and their boards. We've also published comprehensive assessments on terrorism financing for Australia and Southeast Asia, as well as an assessment of the not-for-profit sector. And one of the reasons for the success of these assessments is the way that they're conducted. We reach out to traditional partners in government, as we always do, but we engage extensively with industry. So far, we've conducted over 100 one-on-one meetings with industry and partner agencies to collect highly relevant information and intelligence that underpin these risk assessments. So these are just some of the examples of our collaborative approach with industry to build the regulatory capacity for AML/CTF in the financial sector. Ultimately, our end state is a position where it's easy for industry to comply with its obligations and hard not to. So the work and effort has not been without challenges, whether that be issues with legislation, balancing expectations, bringing people along for the journey, or simply deciding which of the problems we focus on first. However, this partnership is beginning to show real value, and as it continues to grow and mature, my hope it will become a true alliance. But I'll end this talk on my final point. The theme of this year's summit is rebuilding trust, and we all recognise today that in the past few years, the trust between financial sector, the community and the government has been damaged. But at the same time, we recognise the increased efforts of industry to address these issues. And in particular, I want to acknowledge the robust support AUSTRAC has received from the financial sector, which moves us closer to the vision of ours of a financial system free of criminal abuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. With our time constraints, we do have some time for some questions, and thank you very much for taking them. So please raise your hand, and I'll come. And there's one over here. First off, I'll ask you, if I could, Nicole, while we're waiting for the microphone to go over there. You spoke very much about, and I think it's fascinating for this audience to hear firsthand from an agency, a regulatory agency, which is outside the traditional banking and finance regulatory framework. And you spoke very much through the Fintel Alliance of wanting to have a collaborative partnership and open and honest relationship with the sort of people in this room and with the sector. And I know you've said at the start that you can't talk about the CBA case because it's before the courts. Nonetheless, the chairman of CBA, Catherine Livingstone, said at the annual general meeting that there were issues in the 600-page statement of claim that lobbed on the CBA's desk on August 3 that included issues that had never been discussed with the bank. And I'm wondering, is that the case from AUSTRAC's point of view? And if you can't talk about that, would you suggest that that could be the case under a sort of a partnership with an open, honest relationship, that institutions could be surprised, if you like, with issues they never heard about, or would you expect they would always be discussed first with institutions under this arrangement that you're seeking?
Sure, good question. No, obviously I won't talk about the individual matter. However, and I've spoken to nearly all of the banks and their boards since starting and assured them that I wouldn't expect that there'd be, it would be usual for them to be surprised by such serious enforcement action. Of course, there's always incidents where law enforcement come across criminal behaviour that we may not have been aware of, but my nirvana, if you like, is to be in such close contact with particularly the four banks that any issues that we are discussing early on and regularly so that there are no surprises.
So it would be unusual for the banks to be surprised by something like that.
I would
so would that be
so.
a change in approach by AUSTRAC, given what say Catherine Livingstone has said?
No, and I can't comment on the history of what happened and the discussions. I don't believe that that's AUSTRAC's point of view. I don't think that AUSTRAC believed that it was a surprise, but that's something that we'll be working through.
And would it be, in general, AUSTRAC's preference to go to, if there is an action such as this, to come with an agreed settlement that you put before the court, all other things being equal?
Oh, I think everyone wants to avoid court in any litigation situation. It costs us time and money. If we can mediate and come to an agreement beforehand, I think in all situations, whether they're domestic, civil or criminal, it's always the preference to do that.
I'm Nicola Greenberg from Herbert Smith Freehills. I'm really curious, in the context of a Royal Commission, when we're talking about industry partnering with AUSTRAC, and some of the comments that have been in the media recently about banks who should have been telling their investors about conversations with AUSTRAC. As a federal intelligence agency, is this a live issue for you to help your partners to balance the interests of their investors with the intelligence information that they're discussing with AUSTRAC?
Look, it is a difficult issue. Obviously, we have a broader remit of wanting a stable financial sector. We're not looking specifically at impact on shareholders, but that's obviously covered by that broad remit. Yes, look, this is something that law enforcement struggles with all the time. How much information can you give so that you can assist an agency or a person in getting to an end with an investigation without damaging that? And of course, you've got businesses that have responsibilities, reporting responsibilities. So it is a case-by-case basis, but it is something we're very alive to, and it's certainly something that we want to be looking at with the future legislation with tipping off provisions, because I think banks do it very well in the fraud sector of sharing information about, say, credit card fraud, and we'd like to see more of an environment where this sort of information can be shared amongst regulated entities to protect the whole sector.
Hi, Nicole. Peter Ryan from the AM program at the ABC.
Hi, Peter.
Just a question about money laundering. Obviously, the focus has been on CBA and Tabcorp last year, but what about the pointy end of laundering when it comes down to, I guess, pubs and clubs and those type of areas that people wouldn't necessarily think? What's happening in that area to educate that industry, I guess the club industry or the pub industry, about their responsibilities? It must be a major task that those organisations or those smaller businesses need to take on.
Excellent question, Peter. We do actually regulate pubs and clubs, so we have actually gone out recently and given them an education package. And one of the struggles that AUSTRAC has had, I think, in the last few years, the legislation's only relatively new, 2006, is that a lot of people, I think or have thought previously that money laundering is a white-collar crime with no victims. It's just another form of tax avoidance. It's now that we're trying to create the picture for regulated entities and for community in general to understand that money laundering has a very big impact on our everyday lives because of the involvement now of serious and organised crime. Crime has changed. It's not about stealing cars anymore. It's about using technology to make money through a whole range of these different areas, and money laundering is a massive part of that, as you all know in this room, because it's your business. So looking at agencies such as pubs and clubs and casinos, and then of course there's non-regulated agencies, entities such as real estate agents, lawyers and accountants, that we're going to be looking at really ramping up that education piece so that the whole sector is looking at it. Good.
Just a couple of quick ones. We focus a lot on the traditional institutions, the big banks and so forth,
Yep.
but as we've also spoken about here, this is in a world of startups and disruptors and big data. Does concepts, given you're focusing on the big regulated entities or not, does the concept of things such as open data, does that come onto your radar, and would you see that as a particular weak point for criminal activity?
Massively, and it's like all these things, there's pros and cons. The big data issue is an interesting one. From a financial intelligence point of view, it's great to get as much data as possible so that we can mine that and start to connect the dots. There's also, with a lot of the compliance, is the know your customer digital identity question, and how we do that in government so that we can do that right across the board and it stops costing individual businesses money. But then of course you've got the flip side of what's just happened with Facebook, and all of a sudden people made more aware, how could you not be, of information out there and sharing it, and they then get reticent about doing it with government. So it is a massive issue for us. But you know, interestingly, new technology, we've just yesterday started regulating digital currency, and the businesses that are really wanting to start up and be professional in that area have welcomed that regulation because it gives them guidelines and it enables them to actually show trust to the public that they're doing the right thing.
So you have a specific focus on open banking, peer-to-peer lenders, cryptocurrencies
Yep.
as well?
Cryptocurrencies.
And just finally, a personal question, if I may. You mentioned Facebook. With someone in your position, how would you deal or recommend people deal with something such as Facebook?
I'm a dinosaur when it comes to Facebook. I'm not on Facebook. I don't even Twitter. I'm astounded from a law enforcement background how much information people are willing to put out there, and how naive people can be about the access to that information. And I'm particularly worried about it from a law enforcement point of view, about kids putting information on there and then access to kids. So I just think we need to be very cautious about the way we go forward, and people need to be more aware.
Thank you. Well, everyone, can you please thank Nicole Rose for her address today?
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Because sessions have been so interesting, we have gone a bit late, so we are now heading out for our break. You are released for about about 10 minutes, so it's a shortened break because we have gone a bit over time. We'll come back with, this will be the last you'll see of me today. We'll come back with James Ayres, the Financial Review's Financial Services Editor. We'll be first up with Kelly O'Dwyer, the Minister for Financial Services, one not to miss. So we'll see you in about 10 minutes.